Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of MTM Lens. I'm Caroline Wren, the MD of MTM, and today I'm joined by Felix Danczak, Global Head of Marketing at Zuora. I recently shared our innovative heart framework for sustainable growth at Zuora's Subscribed Live conference in London. Felix and I had a lively discussion afterwards, and we thought it would be great to try and continue it here. So get ready to dive deep today into the world of healthy acquisition and retention and total monetization. In this episode, we're going to unpack the secrets behind building healthy customer relationships, driving sustainable growth in the subscription economy, and how to stay relevant in today's rapidly changing and crowding market. Felix, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. This is a topic really close to my heart. I've been involved in the SaaS space. We're the biggest subscription market we have really these days for kind of 10, almost 15 years now. But acquisition and retention is crucial in that market, but also the markets that we serve. It was a great conversation. I'm super excited to keep it going today.
Super. Thank you.
I'm actually going to steal the first question because I had so much to ask you that we didn't get through to at the keynote. And I actually want to dig further into your heart framework. So you emphasize behavioral science and emotional science throughout that. And I want to ask you not what works, but what's the biggest mistake that people make, right? It's always easier to learn through failure than it is through success. So what is the biggest mistake when people try and align their business model to the needs of customers? What do people do wrong?
The biggest mistake is the most obvious one, is just not getting the basics right in terms of delivering what it is that you're actually there to do for the customer. Avoiding that mistake involves having a clear understanding of jobs to be done theory. In essence, what is the job that the customer has hired your brand to do for them? What's the unique problem that you're there to solve in their life? And it's really useful to understand what competitor or existing behaviour you're replacing as well when they hire you to do some kind of job and meet some kind of need for. One of the greatest representations that I can think of an example of a business that did that really well and really inspiringly is Sky Glass. That's an engagement that MTM had over several years with Sky as they worked to produce their first TV set for the UK market. And how did we do it? Well, Sky knew that they needed to innovate. They needed to challenge the status quo because in manufacturing a TV set, they were entering an already crowded and very mature market, but they needed to subvert that. It was a vertical integration for them, of course, hardware and content, and they needed to thrive with a new technology, IPTV. So we knew that Sky had an imperative as well as an appetite to innovate. And Sky's motto is believe in better, right? So they had to live up to that. How did they figure out what better was going to look like? Sky and MTM went back to basics and we found out what consumers' pain points were. Not just about the physical features of the hardware, but the entire brand experience of choosing, buying, installing, paying for, and then watching a TV. I mean, quite often in product development, the ideas come first from the product people. They understand the art of the possible, right, in terms of the technical capabilities of their production lines. The marketing folk in the TV set category were training customers to buy on features like 4K UHD or 8K UHD. This is sort of terminology and incremental technical improvement that most customers actually don't
I have no idea.
Really understand. Also, if we're honest, when we think about how it makes us feel, it doesn't feel great either to be standing in the shop thinking, well, I don't know what the difference is between these and I don't know how much I should care about it and I don't know how much I should pay for this better version. So really, there's a whole category there that isn't making people feel the way they want to. There's something in there, actually, from a behavioural science perspective about not quite getting it right. Sky Glass tried to revolutionise as much of that as they could by simplifying the whole proposition down to no dish, no box, no fuss. They removed the need for customers to sort of flounder around looking for the perfect set in terms of the incremental improvements in product features, but really had very little to choose between them. They created a simple one-box solution where all your soundbar and everything was all built into it, and crucially, it managed to solve some of the pain points that the category just hadn't addressed for a very long time, solved some of the clutter in the living room, took away the need for a satellite dish and a set-top box. And all of that really was about truly listening to what customers actually needed from the category.
I love this story, and we talked a little bit about it before, but I wanted you to go into some more detail. But I've never told you I actually have a Sky Glass. For precisely that reason, I was done with wires. I couldn't deal with it anymore. I wanted simplicity. And I don't know the difference between 4K and I understand technically what that means, but I don't know if it means I can see the football a little bit better or a little bit worse.
Do you feel slightly embarrassed about admitting that when you're with somebody who is very much a sort of a technical evangelist?
I would be terrified to talk to any of my friends about the technical features of my television.
Yeah.
It's not an important thing for me, but I want it to be, I want it to work. I want it to work, and I want it to work without it being a challenge in any way, shape or form. I want to be able to turn it on, and I want to be able to turn it off again, and I want to see really well. Ideally, I'd like my friend who might care about such things to go, oh, nice TV. But that's as far as it goes for me. And I think that's what Sky Glass did really, really well. And it just works, right? And everything just plugs in and out.
This principle of getting the basics right is about truly understanding what your customers need from the category, and often at a more emotional level, and often in terms of the kind of ideal brand experience,
Right.
and deliver to that first and foremost. If a brand falls into the trap of adding lots and lots of features or services that just aren't really needed and aren't really true to the core essence of the job it's being hired to do, then it can often really sort of dilute the clarity of its proposition or dilute the mental availability, to quote the Byron Sharp model, in people's minds. We can look at brands like Uber or Just Eat. They're expanding very successfully, but they also have a bit of a risk coming now. They've been very straightforward, very clear propositions with a kind of a sort of system one feel about them, a few clicks and your meal is coming to your door or your taxi is coming to your door. But they're starting to expand into more and more and more categories, including some categories which are a little bit more system two, need a little bit more kind of conscious thought. And it's potentially becoming a little bit diluted as to what they stand for. It's not an insurmountable problem, but it takes an awful lot of cunning marketing communication to get that kind of proposition across.
We should talk about it a little bit later, and it will come on to the balance between acquisition and retention, particularly this decade versus the last decade. The balance between the expansion of a business, that kind of growth at all costs, like we need to add a new service. Well, we've maxed out the ride hailing category. Now we've got to sell, food hailing and full food reception. And then we've got a dressmaking or whatever it is, whatever's the next thing that they can add, but it dilutes the brand proposition, which in itself actually then slows that flywheel, or you reduce retention, increase churn at the cost of acquisition. And it can become a really negative cycle quite quickly. Have you seen that?
That's the potential, yes. Yeah. And I think that's where, just observing the Uber business, for example, that would be some of the concern for them. In the West, we haven't quite got the mega apps that you get over in China, where there'll be an app that tries to service every kind of, retail and leisure need. That
You're aware Elon Musk is coming.
Yes. Mate, do you think that's where he's going next?
I believe that's what he's going to do with X. Add on a cryptocurrency functionality to X, and you have a system that can allow anyone anywhere to transfer currency to anybody else without going through major banking platforms. Add on Uber. If you look at the big apps, the Weibo apps, you don't go to a separate app for Uber. You message the platform and say, I'm here, pick me up, and it works. He originally wanted X to be the everything app. That's what he wanted, and X.com to be. I think maybe it's been taken left field by his political ambitions, but I think that's what X may well become if they can avoid its toxicity.
Interesting.
You talk really interestingly there for Sky around like the data that you drove.
Yes.
Is there a risk in there too? I mean, I feel it in my profession, data, particularly in a marketing context, it's always about how much data do you have, be led by the data. Somewhere in there's a balance of making sure that we are data-driven with our insights, but also maintaining that emotional connection. And I don't think it's a binary opposite. Of course, understanding people's emotions is a data point, but it's very easy to get sucked in by the numbers that we can manage, the classic Peter Drucker, you can't manage what you don't measure. It's hard to measure emotion. How do you advise brands to strike the balance between thinking about the intangible of the emotional connection that can be really hard to measure outside of like a kind of a numeric NPS score, which has all sorts of flaws, and the data, the hard data, the revenue that they're getting?
There's so much that data can do to drive deeper emotional connections, for sure, in so many areas of media, advertising, technology, and services across the business or consumer spaces. Data can be used to drive strategic or tactical insights that then can mean that the relationship that you have with your customer can be personalized. We've also seen some really interesting examples of some of the music streamers personalizing the relationship from the get-go. Some of them have a fantastic onboarding experience when you first set up their premium services, actually. YouTube has done this quite well, for example, when you're asked a series of questions about your favorite artists, and often it's, a fun, visual, engaging interface as well.
Click,
and then another page appears. And it's so impressive how they're able to go deeper and deeper into even the most niche of genres, bringing you more and more artists. And in so doing, they are collecting so much data about you that helps them personalize the experience that they will serve you from there on in. So they're collecting data during onboarding, but they're doing it in a fun way. And they're doing it in a way that gives you, from the start, a great brand experience, because it makes you think, wow, these guys get music, and wow, they get me. And I am confident now that the recommendations they're going to deliver me are going to be personalised. So you're setting those brilliant expectations and creating an emotional connection.
I think particularly with music, it's really important because of the emotional connection we have with music,
yes,
or art, any kind of art in general, really. I'm sure everyone listening has seen at least one article around this, or I've had my Spotify Wrapped and I feel trapped in the algorithm. There is a balance there somewhere of like, yes, I know they want to service stuff that we want to listen to. And yeah, to be honest, 90% of the time, I want to listen to Taylor Swift.
No.
It's not my personal vibe. But equally, part of the brand promise, the trusted engagement with Spotify is that they're going to give me something, hey, I might not already know. And I wonder whether we're now used to, and I'm going to press you on the trailer for the rest of the show, hedonic adaptation a little bit later, about stuff where we want something different. Do you think that these ways of personalizing from the get-go will have to evolve over time to encourage us, like to get us beyond what's comfortable?
I think that's really interesting. And Will Page, the former chief economist at Spotify, has actually written quite a lot recently about how the algorithms are pushing everybody into less serendipitous discovery. The algorithm based on what you have consumed, not what you might consume. And so there is a little bit of a fear that we are losing actually some of the discovery which these services were pretty much designed to support for us. I don't know whether it's that the onboarding experience will shift to enable that. I think it's probably that the AI will get cleverer at understanding, oh, you like this, so you might like that. This is similar in some fashion to that, and so we're going to try you and see whether you go for this.
Yeah.
And I think that will be true across music and across every kind of content. And many other services as well. I
feel like we're going to need like a counter AI or a counter algorithm. Most algorithms that are there to drive a regression towards the mean, they're based on statistical analysis ultimately. That's all they are. They just simulate intelligence. You're almost going to need something to simulate the opposite and then challenge you in the middle somewhere.
A kind of random probability generator.
Yeah.
What was the engine that fired the ship in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
The improbability drive.
The improbability drive.
Yeah,
we need one of those.
We're going to need 42 new tracks a year, something like that.
You were talking about, the collection of data to help drive emotional connection. And I mean, that's one of our biggest areas of advice, I think, is try and see an onboarding process as the way that you want to inspire your new customers from the get-go. Collect as much as you can, but in a way that doesn't feel onerous, in a way that feels fun, and where the process of collecting that data is going to feel thought-provoking. That works in a business sense as well, I think. So in setting up software, it should be possible to build in a thought-provoking onboarding service that enables new users to really think about the org changes that they might have to put in place to get best use, out of their software. And that's often the case. I mean, we embodied our CRM that we're using now a year or so ago, and it made us really stop and question a lot of our business practices. And we've made, much more far-reaching improvements at MTM because of that. And so there are real opportunities there to make customers, take a step change up.
I couldn't agree more, particularly in the business environment. I think business software is often a little bit behind consumer software. That's always the way. But I think there's been a big step change in consumer software, and has had consumer anything really for some time around that level of emotional engagement. We're all aware that we all believe customers need to be emotionally engaged, individuals need to be emotionally engaged. But actually, I spent 8 hours, 9 hours, sometimes unfortunately longer at work. Why wouldn't the business apps, the business software I use be more emotionally available? And I'm going to say a word that everyone will have a visceral emotional reaction to, which is Clippy. Everyone remembers Clippy, which is the Microsoft, right? The Microsoft Word bot. Looks like you're writing a letter. No, I'm not. I just want to use the word sincerely. That's now coming back. Microsoft now advertising Copilot built in to their software. And you think actually the ability for a lot of these business apps to personalize and build that emotional connection we kind of went, oh, it's business, don't be emotional. I think that's probably been a mistake. And I think it's interesting to see it coming right back in because AI can do that at scale really fast.
Absolutely. Because when you think about, what powers decisions at work, people are trying to get the best outcome for their company, for their boss, for themselves and their own career. And all of those are outcomes that come with, with strong emotion attached.
The first rule of marketing is the biggest pain point anyone has is they'll get fired.
Yeah.
Right. It's not about a business need. It's not about, are we going to improve acquisition or reduce churn? It's what happens if I do this and it goes wrong? What will be the blowback on me? No one wants to admit that, but it's the quiet rule. Right? We have to challenge and meet that pain point, and we have to have a value proposition towards that before you do almost anything else. People always talk about, no one ever got fired for hiring IBM. That's got to be a lie. Someone was definitely fired for hiring IBM, but that's the concern. Make the easy choice before you think about the business needs, whether or not we want to admit that.
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. Subscription software should also be trying to factor in how do we want our users to feel and thinking about that from the get-go. One of the areas MTM's done a lot of work around emotional connection as well is in advertising. And this is probably one of the areas where, data is being used in the most advanced way to create emotional connections, right? So ads are, of course, often served online based on what people have bought or the prediction of what they might buy in the future. And we've all seen the examples of where that falls down. So we've all been followed around the internet by a pair of trainers that you've already bought. Leave me alone. Why would I want to buy them again? So retargeting can be clumsy when it doesn't work.
Speaking as a marketer, that drives me insane.
Yes.
I'm like, you're just wasting your money.
Yes.
I've already bought the shoes.
Yes.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. Complete waste. And you've really annoyed me now.
Yeah.
So you've actually damaged my...
You can take them back. I don't want the shoes anymore.
I think, what works really well is when broadcasters or publishers use their own data about people's content preferences to, and they're monetizing that data. So they're selling ads that are more data-driven. Try to make sure that you're targeted with ads that are based on your interests. I mean, that's a win-win, right? We've done research with consumers that proves that they actually prefer to be served with that type of advertising, and they're happy for their data to be used in that way generally. And we've also looked at studies where we can demonstrate the extra ROI that, the advertisers receive, particularly in areas like, FMCG or something where, you can see an immediate kind of sales spike from that type of advertising. And why is that ROI better? Well, it's all about the psychology of landing your message with your potential audience at a time when, they are interested in the job that you could do for them. They're perhaps feeling the need for what it is that you offer, and there's a good alignment between your message and their needs. So if that's about reaching someone in the moment when you could affect their hearts and minds and you could build that kind of connection with them, actually, some of our work in advertising has used neuroscience techniques. So we can actually see the brain lighting up. And the areas of the brain that academics believe are most associated with building an emotional connection.
Right.
So, this is a field of neuromarketing, and it's not a completely precise science, but, as far as possible, you can see that the brain appears to be building stronger emotional associations with a brand when the content or the ads that people have consumed is more relevant to them.
We see adverts that have almost nothing to do with a product or indeed a service at a functional level.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone here has probably, one way or the other, will have seen the Amazon advert that's been doing the rounds around this janitor who's singing in a hall. The ad has nothing to do with what Amazon does. Click here, the thing delivered. But it's all about the emotional connection you have with the brand. The John Lewis advert, the best example, at least in this country. Every year, it's about the emotional connection with something. Doesn't always work, but it's never about come to shop, buy a thing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. They don't need to show the product anymore.
No, because they've already built that, and that's the value of brand. We all know what Amazon does, so all they need to do at this time of year is remind you they do it really well.
Yeah. Data and emotion.
Cool.
I think we should talk a bit about money.
Sadly, it makes the world go round, I'm told.
Yeah. What do you think about, using data to drive different kinds of pricing models? It's now possible, of course, to move beyond, let's do a discount at happy hour, into demand-based pricing, and even beyond that, into truly personalised pricing.
Personalised pricing, which is what we're really talking about here, there's a bunch of ways of talking about it. So Zuora, we've transitioned away. We used to center ourselves around the subscription economy. We are moving beyond that now. We recognize that subscription is really just one way of monetizing and one way of thinking about it. We think about monetization as about the price, the package, and then the way in which you take money ultimately in return for goods or services. There's transaction, there's subscription, and then there's usage, right? Personalized pricing is fundamentally making sure that you take that price, that package, and that method of monetization to meet the need of each individual customer, whether that be a business or an individual. Data is really, really crucial there, because the more granular you get, going back to your YouTube example, the more you have to be on the money. Because if you get that wrong for a customer, if the equivalent of following someone around the internet with a bad ad will turn them off incredibly fast. If I give you a price that is off for you, you'll go away and you'll probably never come back. And so that's a real challenge for businesses. The flip side of that challenge is that if you don't do it, your competitor is doing it. It's a knife fight right now. No one's bought a gun yet, but it's still a knife fight. You've got to hit that personalized pricing faster, better than the other. You see it happening in some of the B2B SaaS apps, but you see it happening in personalized pricing at a consumer level as well. Think of people, companies like HubSpot, who have moved away from subscription-based pricing almost entirely towards a seat-based pricing, particularly at the lower end of the market, because that's what startups now expect and need. And all of their competitors have essentially followed suit almost immediately. A lot of the customer service apps, like the Intercoms of this world, have now suddenly switched to outcome-based pricing because everyone else suddenly did. But it's got to be matched at a personalized level. I am sure there are plenty of their customers who are still on a subscription-based model because that's where emotionally they sit.
Yes.
And the best bit about, particularly around in the software model, is that people have a lot of information about how you use that tool, how often are you logging in, how many seats of a SaaS tool are you actually using, so therefore how are they going to monetize you in the right way? Is it just one person logging in every day, but they're in it for 8 hours? Well, seat-based pricing isn't going to work for them because you're not going to make any more money. So maybe you want to charge by hours in the platform, whereas Intercom have moved to, well, how many tickets are you solving? Because that's the value metric that they really care about. What I think is really interesting about personalized pricing is that it's borderline invisible to the customer. We don't know we're being personalized. We just see the web page, see whatever price, package, monetization model we've been chosen to receive. Now, this is not to say that every company out there has a zillion pricing models. I think we're way away from that, and I don't think we'll actually ever get all the way there. But I do think we are getting towards it. It's almost worth testing yourself. Go to a website. We all know this is true with airfares, or we all emotionally feel it's true with airfares, even though actually it's less true than we might like to think. If you clear your cookies, you'll get a different price than you had before you made that search. Whether or not we are willing and able to pay more for a product than the next person can pay is increasingly important data. The damage that we can do is if we use that data without the emotional connection you talk about. Oh, they are willing to pay more, so therefore they should pay more, is often the logical, it's the capitalism-driven next step.
Yes.
It's the first level capitalism next step, but it's perhaps going to damage you because next time they'll go somewhere else. But why should they pay more? And is that going to impact you in the long term? That's an acquisition-led strategy, but not a retention-led strategy. Okay, they'll pay more this time. But next time, will they go somewhere else?
Yes. And a good example of that is hotels as well. If you're on a comparison website, but you've searched for the specific hotel by name, because that's where you really want to stay. And many sites these days are sophisticated enough that they will actually show you a higher price than if you had just been searching based on general criteria and that hotel had come up for you. Because if you're willing to flex over where you stay and perhaps consider the best price, then you're not showing as much willingness to pay for that specific hotel. Are they willing to pay, and therefore can we charge more? There's a can we get away with it feel to it, which some people, everyone's value set is different, right? Some people will say, that's okay. I'm all right with paying that. And other people will say, no, that aggrieves me. Someone who wants to come back to the same hotel every time actually is probably going to expect some kind of discounts, promotions, reward scheme.
About 10, 15 years ago, when Zuora started its own journey, subscriptions were kind of in their infancy. And it was very much the wild west of the subscription model. And that was something that we brought a lot of order to, if I might be so bold, drove that change across the business. I wrote a whole book about it. And I think we are now in the wild west of the next transition into this personalized pricing. I think the way you frame it is exactly right. What can we get away with rather than what is right for the customer?
Yes.
This kind of customer centricity. Because what is right for the customer will always ultimately be right for the business.
Yes.
Because right for the customers, they're going to drive back to you. You're going to have that retention in the long term.
Completely.
And certainly the next decade or so, we are seeing slower growth. We'll talk about being in the post-ZERP world, but it is true that growth is harder to come by than it used to be. I know America's growing gangbusters, but half of the growth in the S&P 500 came from less than 10 companies in the last year. It's concentrated. Companies need to think about what kind of service or good are they providing,
Yes.
and how is the customer receiving that value, and thus matching their price and their package and their monetization model to that value metric before they start going, well, what can we get away with?
Absolutely. Yeah. Customer centricity really is the most important pillar of getting pricing right. And that's because a lot of pricing is about fairness, right? You know, if a customer wants to pay the price that you're quoting, that's because they think it's a fair price for the value that they're getting from your business. A fair price in today's market, a fair price for this product or service.
And fair is a crucial word, right? We talk about a fair market. It goes right back to Adam Smith, dead hand. It's like if the market will the market will set a fair price based on what every consumer is willing to pay and every business is willing to supply for. But fair also has an emotional meaning, and this goes right back to where we started. The data, which says the market, all these data points will aggregate to the market fair price, a fair market price, but will also aggregate to an emotional fairness of, is this reasonable?
Yes.
Almost by definition, the market price is where 50% of the market thinks it's too cheap and 50% of the market thinks it's too expensive. So by dint of the market price, half of your market thinks it's unfair.
Sounds like politics now.
Right.
Yes.
And that's a real challenge. And I think businesses need to take a hard look about the word fairness. It's not about what can I charge, but what should I charge?
Yeah.
And not what could I charge, but what should I charge? I think it's really crucial.
And it's really subjective. So each business has to have an understanding of what their customers believe to be fair. Right. When I'm buying tickets for the theatre, say, I might feel it's fairer that I pay more in a demand pricing situation, because I'm aware that means that there will be other people who are accessing the same seats for less money and perhaps are less able to pay, and that I'm comfortable with that because that's my belief system.
And we've been used to it for ages, right? We all know about student pricing. I haven't seen OAP pricing for a while. We don't call them OAPs anymore. We accept that different parts of society have always been allowed to pay different prices.
Yes.
We have youth tickets on the buses. I mean, there's no less utility for someone on the bus taking up a seat than me, but we're all okay with that. And this is where personalized or customized pricing is really, really important, because it allows you to meet the emotional fairness of different parts of the market in different ways without being unfair to other parts of the market. And I think that's really crucial.
Yeah.
But we're still in that Wild West stage where people are still figuring that out.
Yes.
We see it we've got a customer base of just over 1,000 customers, and we see it all day. We have customers with thousands and thousands of SKUs, all testing and learning and testing and learning and testing and learning. We're in that phase. I'd say if anyone listening who is trying to think about personalized pricing and who isn't testing wildly all the time, we've got to wildly test in the Wild West.
Yeah, very good. There's something about transparency in this as well, which is very linked to fairness. You said something earlier about how personalized pricing is often invisible.
Yeah.
And I think there's a stealth component to that actually it might not be completely invisible, but it might look like demand pricing. So people might be aware that they're paying more because they're booking at a certain time, or more than the next person who booked on a different day. But they might believe it to be a kind of demand pricing. Because that's become quite well known now. And I think, the actual true personalized pricing where, you might see a different price to me based on your browsing history, say, I think is invisible to people. I don't think people realize that the extent to which data is driving that kind of price.
I think people are aware of it with things like airline, but I think it happens everywhere. It means people can afford things they couldn't otherwise afford, and they can receive value and services that they need.
Yeah.
But it's still the Wild West, and there's not much there for sure.
If we were advising businesses on which kind of pricing is right, I think one of the key principles for personalized pricing is that the need must be variable. Like media and entertainment, where your consumption needs change, and also what you're consuming can be different. A boxing match different to a film, and so on.
It's the type of the content, right?
Yes.
Ignore the word content, the good or service.
Yes.
Like a boxing match, although I'm not a boxing fan, is a great example. It's nearly always been pay-per-view.
Yes.
It's a one-off event. They're not just one-off, but they're irregular.
Yes.
Football happens every week, so you can pay a regularized subscription. I'm a big F1 fan. sorry, Now TV, I've just cancelled my subscription because there's no F1 for 3 months. So I don't need to pay for 3 months. I know there won't be an F1 match, but I can't tell you when the next boxing match will be. That's entirely dependent on when two groups of people come together and figure it out and exchange vast amounts of money in order to hit each other. And that's fine. But you have to do it one-off, but you can't fix a different model. So it depends on the kind of good or service you're exchanging.
It does. And if you're a huge boxing fan, perhaps you should pay more than the person who isn't really. Well, certainly you might be willing to.
Right. And then as much as I think there was a lot on a personal note wrong with the Logan Paul fight that took place recently, I think that was I had personal objections to it. That was on Netflix, and it was free to anyone who had a Netflix subscription, whereas the next Tyson Fury-Usyk fight, I'm sure, will be incredibly expensive one-off because they're for different kinds of fan. Right? One was a form of entertainment, the other was a form of entertainment, but also sport. So they will have different prices for different outcomes. And I'm sure they'll be watched by a very different cohort of people. But I think it comes down to whether or not you can embrace personalized pricing or hybrid pricing models is fundamentally around whether it's feasible. So can you do it with the technology? What are you selling? You can't really sell oranges for different prices. We talked about customer expectations. Are customers going to think it's fair to price differently? The theatre, yes, but an Uber, maybe not. Do you have that competitive advantage? A boxing match, can't watch it anywhere else, so I could charge you fundamentally what I like. F1 is the same. I pay way too much than I think I should because I really enjoy watching F1, boring as I am. But the moment I don't have to pay, I stop. I'll keep it on for the next few months. I stopped immediately. But they forced me because they had that advantage. I think that's really crucial. The flip side is those challenges they have to overcome. Perceived fairness, which we talked about at length here, and then privacy concerns. Hang on. How do you know that I'm willing to pay more? How do you know that's, well, hang on, particularly we see that in the medical world, right? Should I pay more for a medicine that someone else is paying for? And
how serious is my need? How ill will I be if I don't take this medicine? That just feels deeply uncomfortable.
Right, and how ill do I have to be to get a cheaper price? If I was more ill, and who's making that judgment? And then obviously regulatory scrutiny is obviously really important, but I think that's something I wonder if we'll see.
I think we should, absolutely. I mean, I think, you only have to look at the public outrage over some of the surge pricing in concert tickets,
right?
Where people have complained, the Oasis gig in the UK or, I know Taylor Swift, back to her, avoided using it for the Eras tour recently.
She was explicit about it, right?
Yes.
And that was part of the value proposition was, I love you, you are my fans.
Yes.
How she loves all 350 million of them, I don't know. But I love you, you are my fans, and I won't break your trust. I won't break your perceived fairness. Everyone has a right to my music. Totally fair. Whereas somehow it felt more, at least for me, I went, it sounds like Oasis.
Yeah, I know. When artists refuse to use techniques like that to optimize their revenues, that then looks like they do have their fans' interests at heart, that they're behaving with integrity. And so, from a behavioral science perspective, as where MTM often works, that's the kind of thing that's going to keep that emotional connection, that's going to keep people coming back and sort of, it's going to protect retention, essentially. We know dynamic pricing is really, really contextual. I feel like we all know that if it's raining, that Uber might, be more likely to put the price up, or if it's later.
And this is reasonable. It's pissing it down. I'm happy to pay more. I don't want to get wet. There's a price I'm willing to pay on staying dry. That seems okay. But I think there are environments where I imagine Uber puts up prices when they shouldn't.
Exactly. And, I think, if we had a scenario where, which has happened, which has been reported, that, if Uber are using their data to charge the highest price they think they can get away with for a young lady trying to get home in the middle of the night from, a very deserted area where there's no other transport forms available, and, it's looking like that young lady is in a vulnerable position, essentially. So there's a safety concern. Should Uber be able to surge price to that level? And perhaps there should be some regulation and some caps around that kind of behaviour.
Yeah, I think there probably will be, as we understand the impact of how we can now not just crunch big data, which feels very 2010 to say that now, but activate and use that big data to make small data, right? Use big data to make individual data.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's going to be a big change.
Yes.
And I think as companies try to explore and manage that and get into that knife fight, because they have to get it right because everyone else is doing it too.
Yes.
They've got to pilot and iterate. They're going to have to communicate transparently to an extent, like, hey, we're testing this.
Yes.
If you want to see our base price, click here. It might be higher, it might be lower than what you've already heard.
Yeah.
I really want to talk to you about hedonic adaptation.
Yes.
I know it's a bit of a shift, but I was something I found absolutely extraordinary when we talked about this, particularly as we think about not just acquisition, which we talked about kind of a lot about. Pricing is all really about acquisition, or a lot of, but let's talk about retention. Retention is really, in this coming decade, it's going to be how people make their money. Talking about hedonic adaptation, what does it mean?
Yeah. So hedonic, from the same root as, hedonism, so, pleasure. And, at the end of the day, we're all animals that are driven by trying to avoid pain and trying to move towards situations and experiences that create more pleasure for us. And, when we buy something that's serving a need, that's maybe solving a pain point or enhancing our lives in some way, then we get a form of pleasure from that. But not the same amount of pleasure forever and ever, after a long period of time. So hedonic adaptation is where we don't get the same intensity of enjoyment from buying something or using a service as we once did. So sometimes when a customer has been buying a subscription product or service for, say, a couple of years, be different for different types of products and services, they might find that they're losing interest a little bit, whether they're aware of it or not. So something that might have been intensely exciting and enjoyable at the beginning can actually become routine. They can become a little bit blasé about over time. It doesn't necessarily mean that their needs have changed. I think businesses in those kind of situations often think, our customers' needs are changing. They want something different from us now. It's not necessarily quite the right way to understand it. It's just that they no longer gain the same intensity of enjoyment as they once did. How do you get around that? Well, you have to get back into the sort of the behavioural science and think about how can you tap into keeping the brain surprised and delighted. Because if something's become routine, it's become a little bit tedious, essentially. It could still be a pleasurable experience, like receiving flowers. We work with Freddy's Flowers, lovely brand that send out flowers to people's homes on a subscription service. And we discovered that their new customers feel all sorts of wonderful positive emotions when the flowers land. The anticipation of building the bouquet themselves, sense of ownership and pride over having created something that looks great in the vase on the dining table. They're intrigued and curious as to what's going to be in that week's delivery, because it's different every time. All these wonderful feelings. But over a period of about 2 years, that starts to wane as it starts to become a more routine experience for them. So one of the ways that you could counter that, whether you're Freddy's Flowers or a software business working with business customers, would be to introduce something on a variable basis that is going to reward them, something that's going to surprise and delight, but keep it variable. Because when our brain doesn't quite know when it's going to get the next dopamine hit from the next fun or worthwhile experience, that's what keeps you really engaged and wanting to stick around and find out when is the good time gonna land again, essentially.
Right. I think that's a fascinating concept, and it makes sense on a consumer level. And I wonder, just thinking personally about it, how boring brands can make that exciting too. And I'm sure there must be ways, because it's still how we engage with things every day. There are still ways to create moments of hedonism, like the idea of just creating hedonism inside B2B SaaS apps.
It's kind of party clippy, really, is where we're headed, I think.
Yeah. When you explain hedonic adaptation, I'm like, oh yeah, of course that's true.
Yes.
Of course I get bored with stuff over time. But we never had a name for it. We never understood why that was on a scientific level, on a data-driven level. And I think this goes right back to where we really started, is we had a world where a lot of pricing and a lot of packaging was based on kind of experiential knowledge. We kind of all know that offering people 3 packages, a gold, silver, and a bronze, is right, but we didn't know why it was right. It feels like a lot of the data that we're now crunching, a lot of the neuroscience that you guys are doing, is explaining to us why that's right, or why that's so impactful, and then what you could do next. Like, okay, we get it. People get bored over time. Yeah, we knew that. Now we know why, and now we can shift beyond that. I think that for me, that's why we're in this Wild West stage, is we've now gotten to I don't know what the next phase will be. What's phase 3? We knew it worked. Now we know why it worked.
Yes.
Now we're going to have another stage of the evolution of pricing packaging.
Yes, absolutely. At MTM, we've developed a framework that we call our HEART framework, Healthy Acquisition and Retention, which helps us to both assess the situation for a particular brand, whether it's a product or a service, and say, okay, this is how your customers and your prospective customers and your lapsed customers feel about you, so that we can diagnose what are they getting right and what are they not doing so well. And then crucially, because we've wrapped that in a framework of behavioural science, it means that we can point to ideas for interventions to say, well, if this is where your problem lies, then these are the sorts of changes that you might want to implement.
So it's the eugenics to people's evolution, but in a positive way. I want to thank you for your time today. It's been super interesting.
Thank you for coming in.
I think we should come back in 6 months' time, a year's time, and see whether or not what happened to those oasis tickets.
Has the Wild West been tamed?
It might take a while, I think. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you.